There it is.
Boom. We are
Nice.
live, ladies and gentlemen. So I am geeking out a little bit today. This is Jesse from 29 Pedals and Believable Audio. So thanks, Jesse, for making it out.
Thanks,
But
Jeff.
I'm geeking out, everybody, because I have the Euna on my board, and everybody knows right now it's a big buzz pedal that's out in the ether. But I got to play through one, and we're going to get deeper into it. And I might even play some guitar today, believe it or not. But I want to welcome you to the show at Home with Mark. So thanks, Jesse. You are episode 21, man.
Oh, nice. I've been watching I caught up on all the back episodes that I missed recently, and they're all really great. I like seeing all these guitar players. I like hearing about everybody's story and stuff.
Cool, man. Well, that's what we're going to do with you, brother. I want to jump right in.
I can tell a lot. I'm told I'm very verbose, so you might have to cut me.
That's totally fine. We got as much time as you want. So give me a little bit of background. I know, we talked a little bit before the show, and you guys, we kind of got down. I feel like I could talk to Jesse all day, but let's kind of go into your story. I want to hear about like how you ended up where you are right now.
Sure. I mean, for a while I called myself an audio engineer because that's how I made a living, and I guess I still kind of think of myself that way. For most of my life, I just hung out in recording studios and in venues, either doing front of house or engineering records. And maybe about, after I moved to LA, and I ended up not liking making records as much as I used to. I grew up in like an analog tape studio run by a really amazing engineer called Andy Kravitz, who lives out here now, but he lived in Philly back then. And he was kind enough to let me just kick around the studio, and he just had tape and old Neves, and that's how I grew up working. And a lot of the other guys I worked for in Philly, Ian Cross and people in Philly would know, they all worked like that. And when Pro Tools and stuff came around, I was into it, and it was okay. I liked it a bit. After I moved out to LA, I sort of spun my wheels for a while. I just got tired of being like an editor, which is what Pro Tools kind of turned everybody into. Because I love getting sounds and working with gear and tracking and things like that. And those gigs just got less and less. And I had always been a repair tech on the side, because back in Philly, there aren't really a lot of repair techs, or there weren't when I was a kid. And when I owned a studio there, I couldn't afford any of them anyway, because I was broke all the time. And so I had to learn to fix my own gear. And through fixing my own gear, you learn to read schematics and you meet other techs. And then I started working more as a tech out here, building studios and building custom wire harnesses and modifying gear. And you just kind of move up that chain. And I was a tech at the Village for a while. My friend Erica, who was the chief tech there for a while, Erica Earl, hired me on as a tech there after we had a gig together doing something else, some other engineering gig on the side. And I worked as a tech at the Village for a while, and I really enjoyed being there. And then I got poached from the Village to work for Stephen Slate, who was, working on, he makes a lot of great hardware, and he needed somebody like a tech kind of person to work in the hardware department. So I worked there, and I helped design some of the stuff that he built, and worked in like logistics. And a lot of my job there was coordinating with like the manufacturing and where things are getting made. And, some things get made here and some things get made other places, and getting it all to come together. Taught me a lot about manufacturing and a lot about the business of gear, which I had no idea before, because I would just make a one-off pedal here and there for my friends, or fix a level lock, for myself because it was broken. And working for Steven sort of opened the door for me, like, oh, I could, I'm helping to build this stuff. I could build my own stuff. And it sort of kind of planted the seed. And I worked for Steven for a while, and then I left from there. Basically, the guys who were working under me there had sort of grown to the point where they were growing past, what I was able to do, and it was time to let them kind of take the show and run with it, which they've done an amazing job at that. And so I left, and I took a job working for Ivana Manley at Manley Labs here in California, because she's an amazing person and she makes amazing equipment. And getting to see firsthand like her operation also like kept encouraging me to do it. And the design for Euna had kind of been kicking around for a while, because when I was a tech, both at studios and doing front of house, you're constantly having to deal with problems with people's guitar rigs. You're in a studio and you want to be able to plug your guitar into the Pultec, or you're at a venue and you need to be able to run 40 feet of wire. And, I was constantly trying to talk these guitar players I was working with into like having an input buffer on their board, because even the conventional ones, you know, will make a certain improvement over not having one at all. But they're rarely very sexy devices. Most of them are designed as an afterthought. It's like an op amp with a piece of wire wrapped around it, and it's it can do some harm to the fundamental tone because it's not designed to sound good. It's just designed to be an impedance converter. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, what if I designed something that filled that role but wasn't a buffer, and but sort of presented the guitar's tone to your pedal board or to your wire going to your amp, you know, presented the guitar's fundamental tone in a way that protected it and, you know, served the purpose of a buffer, but that the circuit actually sounded good and felt good. And from working with like classic vintage gear for a long time, I mean, I kind of specialized in restoring old Neebs for a while here in LA. And, you know, just seeing the insides of those gorgeous things and seeing that like even the impedance converter inside a 1073 is amazing, you know, and saying like, okay, well, I'll just start, you know, applying some of those principles. And I knew how to read schematics and I knew how to solder, but I didn't know how to design PCBs. So I, you know, put the schematic into a CAD program, and then I taught myself how to design the PCBs. And after that, you know, I went through 1 or 2 revs and it was good. And then I designed a cool box to put it in because I like cool boxes rather than just off the shelf boxes. Mm-hmm. And the way I designed it is, I wonder if I actually have one sitting around, is I designed it a 3D printed plastic enclosure because I don't know how to do SolidWorks. And so I designed a 3D printed enclosure and I took it to my metal shop that does a lot of the other pro audio stuff here in LA called Hamilton. And I was like, hey, can you help me make this out of metal? Because I don't know how to make it out of metal. I only know how to make it out of plastic. And he was like, no problem. And so then he got the custom chassis. And then I just started making them kind of one at a time for a while. And I think in January, like 1 had sold, and then, you know, February, 2 more sold. And it started picking up heat, you know, maybe March, April. And it's been growing really steadily, which is great. And it's very inspiring to me. And it's inspired me to finish some other designs that I have on the bench. But, you know, it's, I guess that's kind of how I got into making pedals. I just sort of like grew into it because I'd always done it. And really the last component for me was understanding how business works and understanding that like, oh, I could make something with my logo on it and sell it to people. Because I'd been doing it without the logo and without selling it, you know, all my life. Most of the stuff in my old studio in Philly was either modded or fixed, or somebody gave it to me broken instead of paying me for a gig. And, you know, I would fix it and make it work. And so everything around me is already customized, like all my guitars and stuff like that. I think the only guitar I have that is stock is a Rick 330. And apart from that, everything's been modified. All those amps are modified. Like, I mean, some of the pedals I keep stock because I'm starting to meet designers that I think are really inspiring, you know, like Matt from 1981 and John from EAE and all these guys that I'm meeting that are really cool. You know, Chris from R2R, like he makes amazing stuff. And so I wouldn't modify that stuff because it was made, you know, by a person I know and I really like it. But everything else is modified. You know, like
so you like the Tinker.
Yeah, the Fender's barely recognizable as a Fender anymore. The Trainer over there is barely recognizable as a Trainer. That PV's got a bunch of weird stuff in it now. Yeah.
What did you do to the PV?
I modded all the filter caps, changed a lot of the values in there. I redid all the tube sets because, you know, especially in the world of living in your apartment, most of these amps are super loud, even for apartment dwelling. So you just get 12 AUs and swap all the tubes out for like the lowest gain tube you can. And you'll be surprised how usable some of those, you know, overdrive channels that don't sound good on amps like that, how good they are. And I've always actually liked PV stuff. It's really well designed. And I owned a PV console back at my studio and people made fun of it, but it was one of the best engineered consoles you could get for a while. It was an AMR, big giant 32 channel AMR that was manufactured by them. And when it broke, I called up PV. I was living in St. Louis at the time and it broke. And it, like, the power supply blew up. And at that time, I only knew a little bit about fixing like something complicated like that. And I called it up and the guy who designed it still worked there.
Oh, wow.
And he put me on the phone and he was like, okay, get out your multimeter and heat up your soldering iron and we're going to fix your desk. And over the phone, he taught me how to fix it. And so I've always had a soft spot for their gear since then because like it's designed by people who care about gear, You know what I mean? I really feel like that about their stuff. So I did mod it, but mostly just to lower the gain, open up the overdrive channel a bit so it's not so and turn into just like another sound of a channel rather than an overdrive channel. Because these days I don't think the overdrive channel on amps get really used that much. And I've always been a fan of like single channel amps anyway. You know, that's the same thing that happened to the Fender over there is like the drive channel just gets the bejesus modded out of it because I just want a different sounding amp channel. I don't want distortion from there. I'll hit it with plenty of gain and it'll distort. I don't need the amp to do it for me.
Right. Is the PV like a classic 30 or classic
50?
Yeah,
it's a little blonde classic 30 from the first run of them with the square badge. The badge under the cute little rug. But
yeah, I had a the first like the PV Classic 50.
Yeah.
With the 410 cab.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, they were great. You know, I sold it and I kind of regret it, but the reason I got it is because I saw Stone Gossard was using one on the tour with Pearl Jam, and I was like, "What? He has a PV? What is that thing?" And
yeah,
then I like
they're really good sounding amps, and also I'm a really big fan of gear that you don't think is precious. You know what I mean? Like nobody buys one of those amps and is like, you know, nervous about taking it on the road. You buy it because it's great on the road. It's rugged. It sounds really good. You know, there's some magic things that might sound better in the world, but they're really fragile and you'd be weird to take them out, you know? I mean, because I don't think gear is designed to be like, you know,
handled with white gloves all the time.
I mean, everything I have has scratches and dents and like, you know, some hog taken out of it or something like that. And I kind of wouldn't have it any other way. I get really nervous when I have something new and nice before it gets dirty a bit. Because once it gets dirty, you know it's yours and you can throw it around. You know, like everything on Euna is PCB mounted, and it's, you know, like a solid steel chassis. And so you could probably, I haven't tried it yet, but you could probably throw it off a truck and it would still work. Because I just don't believe in building things that are fragile. You know, it's like you know, like you can take the back cover off and look at it and put the back cover on, and if you know, bonk it together, it's not going to break anything because there's no wires in there, you know.
It seems it's very tank-like. Like when I opened it up and pulled it out, I was like, oh, first of all, the footprint was like smaller than I thought it was going to be, which was like a nice surprise. But it feels like you could take a sledgehammer to it and it would be totally fine.
Yeah.
Like, it's great. So let me back up. I want to go backwards in time real quick. So did you grow up in Philly?
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Philly, basically Valley Forge Park area.
Okay.
My mom's from Westchester, Pennsylvania. My dad's from New York City. And they lived together in Philly with my older sister for a while, but they had moved out to the burbs right before I was born. And so I grew up like you know, in the 80s and 90s in the burbs of America outside of Philly. It's a great place to grow up. Really like it. Very foresty. Lots of woods, lots of like wandering around by myself, plenty of garages to make rock and roll in, you know.
Yep. Yeah. I was curious because there's a band, a Philly band that you probably were already gone. When did you leave Philly?
2007 was when I left Philly.
Oh no, you would have been around. Did you ever remember hearing the band Town Hall?
Oh yeah, I know those guys. Actually, Tim Sonnenfeld lives out here now. He's a good buddy of mine.
Oh man.
I worked with them on a couple things. I don't think I worked on any of their records. They were doing some demos when they first started, and I kind of went over to the house where they were recording and helped set up some things and make a few things sound better. But and I did a few live shows of theirs, either at the Grape Street or at the Point when they were playing at the Point. And so I knew those guys a lot from around the scene. I don't think I worked on any of their records in a really strong way, but I definitely knew them. And like I said, Tim is out here now, and he's a good buddy. We work at the same studio in Silver Lake. Okay,
because my old band, we used to do shows with those guys, and you know, because they were kind of in the jam band circuit in a way, and so were we. But like that first Town Hall record was like a
really good
total revelation.
It was like it was like hard to hear how good it was, you know, because they're about my age and they were in bands and we were on the same circuit and stuff like that. And I was making records in my own place. And like hearing how good that was, I kind of remember just being like the first time someone who I thought of as a peer made something that was awesome. Mm-hmm. And I always have had a lot of respect for those guys because of that. Like they really had a sound, they really had a vibe, and the whole thing kind of worked together really nicely. I mean, their live shows from back in their day were really, really good. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, like they did play the sort of jam circuit in Philly, but they played a lot of regular clubs. They didn't get booked just as like a jam act. They had songs and played shows and stuff too, you know.
Yeah. And if anybody that's listening to this, go check out. There's an album called New Song
Mhm.
by Town Hall. I don't know if it's on Spotify. It might be, but those guys live, the drummer would stay on the kit the whole time, but the rest of the dudes would all rotate instruments. And I'm talking horns,
Yeah,
guitars, bass, like they would all rotate. And
and
it was
in
woo.
little rock and roll clubs, you know, it was an amazing thing because that was, I think, doing that kind of became popular again after those guys. But at least in Philly, nobody else did stuff like that at the time, and it was really, really cool to see. You know, I was talking with Tim about it the other day, and I swore that Tim also played a horn, and he kept telling me he didn't. And I was like, I feel like I was at a show and I saw you do it. And he was like, nope, the other guys played horns and I didn't play a horn. And so, but in my memory, everybody did. And so I told him that's
Yeah, I remember him playing bass and playing guitar. I don't ever remember him playing horns, but George Stanford, I was gonna talk to him and see if about getting him on here because I'd
yeah.
love to talk to him again. He's a
George,
great.
I see him from time to time. He's really close with my buddy Ian Cross, and George I think still lives out here. He was living out here for a while. He and I aren't super tight, but I see him from time to time, and he's an incredible musician too. He keeps putting out good stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, Philly is the place. I know everybody says this about their hometown, but I will say that like Philadelphia is one of the best kept secrets for just about everything in the world. There's great music there. There's great food there. There's great art there. There's kind of great everything there.
it's true. My band was supposed to start playing gigs in Philly right before all this crap went down,
Mm-hmm.
and I was looking forward to because we hadn't broken into the Philly market yet. So because there's so much soulful music there, and that's kind of
Yeah.
why I wanted to go there because people. It seems like people that live in Philly that go to shows or go to like bars and clubs to see music are there because they're expecting to have some sort of great music poured onto them, and they're totally open armed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing that's nice about Philly is it's a very low bullshit town. Like Philadelphians just have a low threshold for bullshit. So you're either good or people don't go see you. You know?
Right.
And I mean, I think I think of it as a town that's like suspicious of outsiders because I worked at there's a rock club in Philly for a while called the Grape Street. It's back now, but the guy who was the bartender when I worked there ended up reopening it. But I was there back in the 90s. I started working there when I was like 13 or 14 years old. I was a roadie for a local rock band. And then I just got a job as an engineer there. So I was hanging out at the Grape Street. My dad used to drive me down there after school because I couldn't drive yet and drop me off. And the guys in the band would make sure I did my homework. And Scooter, the bartender, would like make sure I got something to eat because I was like a 13, 14-year-old kid. And then we would do the gig and I was the guitar tech and the roadie for this band that had a weekly residency there. And then, you know, my dad, God bless him, would come pick me up at like 3:00 in the morning. And then I'd go to school the next day smelling like alcohol and cigarettes and everything. I didn't drink it. I didn't smoke, but everybody thought I was a complete juvenile delinquent because I would like basically roll in with looking like I had a hangover every day. It was just because I'd been up till 4:00 in the morning, you know, working at a bar.
God bless music, man. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was a really fun time, and those people are really close to my heart still. You know, like Gary Lee and Alan James and Vanita Gale and Jackie Murphy and all the people I worked with back then. You know, some of them I still keep in touch with. Shane Smith, I knew back then, and he's out here in LA now, and we're tight buddies. But that's how I ended up meeting everybody. I was talking to I was trying to explain something. I forget who I was talking to about it, but somebody was asking me about like how I got this gig or how I got that gig. And it's like every gig I've ever gotten in my life is because I met someone at the gig I had before. And it started way back when I was a 13-year-old kid. Like I can trace every gig I've ever gotten back to being a 13-year-old kid who liked music. And my dad's best friend's daughter was having a birthday party. And one of her friends was this woman in Philly, Jackie Murphy, who had a band. And, you know, basically like we kind of became friendly with her. My dad and I used to go to Manioc and shoot pool on Wednesdays, and we found out she worked at a restaurant. So we'd stop by the restaurant, say hi to her. And one day she was talking to my dad and she said, oh, you know, my guitar tech just quit and I have a gig this weekend or something like that. Do you know anybody who's a guitar tech? And my dad looked at me and he said, Jesse knows everything there is to know about guitars. which was actually a complete fabrication. At the time I was a drummer and I knew everything there was to know about drums, and I had never even held a guitar. But we went out and we bought a guitar, and I bought a book about Joni Mitchell tunings, because Jackie used some Joni Mitchell tunings at the time, and her songwriting partner Vanita did as well. And that's how I got my first gig in the music business as a 13-year-old kid. And I can trace every gig I got to that. That's how I met Andy Kravitz and Ian Cross, who gave me jobs at studios. And through them, that's how I met all the people I worked with when I had my own studio in Philly. You know, like I had a place there called Miriam for a while in Manayunk, and like Pete Donnelly and Matt Muir worked out of there. And I knew those guys because I knew Jim Boja, and I knew Jim Boja because of Jackie and Vanita. And like, you know, just meeting people. And then eventually like Bruce Reinfeld, a really great musician and artist in Philadelphia, was going to mix I was making a record for him because he had the studio next door to me for photo studio. And I was making a record with him, and he said, you know, it'd be really fun to go to LA and mix it with Shane, because Shane had been living out here for like 5-10 years, I think. And we didn't get to see him much anymore. And I was like, that'd be great. I've never been to LA. So we came to LA and mixed it with Shane, and Shane was working at this little studio called Red Star in Silver Lake. And I fixed some stuff for the owner, Dave Kalish, while I was there. And he was like, this is great. You fixed a bunch of stuff and you're cheap. Do you want to come back and fix some stuff again? And I was like, I live in Philly. But he actually flew me out to do a big job. And then one of my old mentors from Philly, Barry McGuire, was working out of that studio as well. And Barry said, hey, can I fly you out again for another month to work on this record? Because I need an engineer for this record. And I was like, I mean, I'll be honest with you, my studio in Philly lost a lot of money, and we never had a nickel to rub together, 2 nickels to rub together when we were doing stuff there. But it taught me a lot about audio engineering, because we made some great records with very little gear. But at the time, I owed my landlord some money, and the job I had just done for David like paid me that plus, you know, a little bit more. And so I walked in to see the landlord, and I said, listen, I know I owe you a lot of money. I know that, you know, you want me out of here because you want to revamp the studio. I have like half of what I owe you. Do you want to just take it and I'll go? And he was like, yes. And so I took the other half of the money, I put all my gear in storage, and I moved to LA with 2 guitars and a suitcase. And immediately I started getting gigs doing like session work. I got a lot of session work in Philly, I think, because I was good for Philly. You know, out here it's like I used to get gigs as a drummer in Philly a lot because I can kind of sound like Jim Keltner, and out here people just call Jim Keltner, and he's way better than I am. So like, you know, I kicked around, I played piano and bass and drums on a bunch of sessions that I was engineering for, and you know, but all those gigs, it's like, oh, Dave Kalish introduced me to Norm, and you know, like Norm introduced me to this person and introduced me to this person. And even today, like people who are helping me sell these things and build these things are people who I had like a personal relationship with that I just met somewhere. Like, you know, we're starting to use a contract manufacturer to help me build, because I don't have time in the day to build all the ones that are selling. So I designed it to be really easy to manufacture. And so we're starting to use a contract manufacturer that I met when I was working for Stephen Slate. And, you know, the people who are helping me do the painting are people I met through this other person. And, you know, it's just like, it's very relationship based, you know, all the way back to when I was a kid in Philly.
Oh, man. That's so amazing. So the LA move, that was 2007?
Yeah, I was working I was doing like tour managing in front of house at the time for Graham Parker, who was like a really great musician that I really like. And I was working at my little studio, and the studio was losing money, and Graham's tours were wrapping up for a bit because he had just finished an album cycle. And, you know, I like the first time you see LA, it's just amazing, especially coming from Philly where it's gray all the time. You know, Philly's in a valley, and it's just like cloudy and gray and 100% humidity, like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's like 2 nice weeks in the spring and 2 nice weeks in the fall, and apart from that, the weather's terrible. So moving out here in, you know, January, I think I moved in March, actually. Moving out to LA in March when it's like 65 degrees and everybody's acting like it's, you know, the dead of winter. I mean, you get a few years of bonus happiness when you move here, just if you move from a cold place, because like you don't have to worry about like stepping in a cold puddle and catching pneumonia and like digging out your car, you know, all that kind of stuff. and I immediately started meeting a lot of great people here. When I was working at Red Star, I engineered a record for Ricky Lee Jones, which was amazing. And Ricky Lee had a gig at Largo, and her guitar tech had the flu or something like that. And so she said, "Oh, you told me you used to be a guitar tech. Will you come to Largo and be my guitar tech for the night?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I went down there and I met Flanagan, the owner of Largo, and it was just after they moved to the big theater. And, a few weeks later, Flanagan hired me to work front of house there. And I worked, I think every show we did for the next 3 years was me. So I got to do all the John Bryan shows, which are unbelievable. I got to meet Gillian Welch and David Rawlings, who are some of the best musicians in the entire world. I mean, if you ever get a chance to see Gil and Dave play, you have to go, because it's hard to describe really how much is in there, how much depth is in what they do, because it's really hard to capture. And when I was working front of house at Largo and they would come by, sometimes I would just if there was a moment in the music where I didn't have to pay attention, I'd put the cans on, I'd just solo up Gil's guitar just to listen to her guitar playing, because it's amazing. And everybody knows David's an amazing guitar player. And so a lot of the front of house stuff I did was at Largo. So also the Fiona Apple shows and the Watkins family shows and a lot of great comedy shows that involved music and stuff like that. That's how I met Michelle Degucello. She was coming through, and she had another tour date in San Francisco a few days later, and she was like to Flanny, basically, "Can I borrow Jesse and take him up to San Francisco?" And then I started touring with her, and eventually kind of lost the Largo gig because I was touring with Michelle and we got really busy. And so we would go to Europe 5-6 times a year and tour front of house there. And it's like my relationship with equipment and helping musicians get their sound and stuff like that has been, like, I guess you'd just call it being an audio engineer. Now I build gear. I still think of myself as an audio engineer, I guess, because all I'm doing is always just trying to get the little electrons to help you do your thing. When we were touring with Michelle, I had the input list down to 12 mics, which for a touring thing, usually you see these days 30 mics on everything, 4 mics on every guitar cabinet. And there's an old engineering adage that says, never use 2 mics when 1 mic will do. And there's another old engineering adage that says air is the best mixer, meaning that if you need to mix 2 sources and you can mix them in the air and capture it with 1 microphone, it will sound better. So I was always trying to slim down our input list, and that led me to really trying to tweak all the amplifiers and tweak everybody's rig and get the exact sound they wanted to come out of their rig so that I could put the most neutral source I could get on there. And musicians like the way I engineer because I don't try to do engineering gags. I'm not oh, this is a cool thing that's going to make your thing do this. It's my gig is being a capturist. I had to deal with, when I was touring with Michelle, her drummer was De'Anthony Parks, who's one of the most amazing drummers I've ever worked with. It's almost weird how good he is. But, he and I were just sitting around having a drink after a show one night, and he was like, I never really like how engineers make my drums sound. I always, hear the recording back and it's not what I sound like. And I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. I can get the drum kit to sound exactly like you playing. So I can make it come through the speakers, sound exactly like it sounds when someone's standing next to you playing. But the deal is I won't be able to fix anything. And because I'm just going to get exactly you and exactly what you do. And there's a pretty well-known way of doing it in an engineering world. But nobody does it live because everybody pretends like live is magic and you have to use a Beta 52 in the hole of the kick drum, which is the worst sounding thing you could possibly do. So the deal I made with De'Anthony was I took a ribbon mic, a cheap MXL ribbon mic that I didn't mind taking on the road, and I boomed it in over the kick drum, over his kick knee. And then what you do is you kind of tweak the pattern in space to get the balance you want. So you put the kick drum and snare drum in the bright part of the pattern. You put the toms in the sort of medium part of the pattern. You put the cymbals in the dark part of the pattern. And then you have a tiny bit of compression, a little bit of EQ for the resonance so it doesn't ring in the room. And then that's all you have to do. And it sounds amazing. It sounds exactly like the drummer. And because De'Anthony is amazing, he really leveraged that. Because one of the things that was hard about miking him, I think a problem with the way people mic drums in general is they suck all the nuance out of it, because De'Anthony would play very, very loud and then play very, very quiet. And, if you have each drum close mic'd and you've sort of rebalanced them the way you think they should be balanced, and all of a sudden he starts playing in a different way, reaching for a different sound, it's not going to sound right. It's not going to translate. Sometimes it would just sound like you would stop playing. right? But he's doing these little things, and you weren't prepared for it because you had it gated and compressed and pushed up here and pulled back there and all the stuff. And so when I started doing the one mic thing on D, you could hear everything he played, every little subtle thing that he played, and it was total magic. And venues treated me like I was insane when I did that. They would be like, "You have to use more mics than that," and I was like, "No, I don't." And they were like, "You really do. Like, you can't do it like that. It won't work." And so I started wearing a suit and tie, and then they took me a little more seriously. Yeah, because when you look like this and you show up and you say, "I'm going to use one mic on the drums," people think you're just a moron. But I would shave and wear a suit and tie, and then I'd show up and say, "I'm going to put one mic on the drums." And then Mix Magazine came to interview me, and like, it changed everything. The tie, which is really sad, but it's true.
Oh man.
And so, but I did that with everybody. Like, I found the perfect mic for Chris Bruce's guitar cabinet, and I found the perfect way to get Jebin's keyboard right through, and I like tirelessly kind of quest for helping musicians get their fingers into, the place where other people could hear it, whether it's like recorded or live. And like Euna was a part of that because, all the time you're like, oh, okay, like, we need to drive all this cable, or, like the guitar's just not sounding right today, or you broke a string on the Strat and you need to use the Les Paul for this track, but, the Les Paul doesn't have the brightness, and all these little problems that people would encounter. I'd say, if you just had a really, really amazing input amplifier that didn't make any gain and didn't really change the fundamental tone of your rig, but sort of like just made sure that everything you plug in after it is fine. It doesn't care. Like, you can plug that thing directly into a Pultec if you want to. It's not gonna hurt your guitar tone. It's not gonna like sound really dull. If you just took your guitar cable, plugged it into a Pultec, but if you plugged into Euna and then plugged that into the Pultec, you could do it. So all of a sudden it opens up all these possibilities of like creative patching and things like that, because now you could put like a true bypass looper on your board and, put an LA2 in it if you're sitting around your studio and use that as your pedal board compressor. It'll be amazing because Euna can drive it,
It's weird because, and you know what, maybe I'll start playing a little bit to show people, but there's a level of like when I first plugged into it, and I only had like 10 minutes to play with it because I'm the cook in the house and I go upstairs and cook dinner right after work for my daughter and my wife. But she's like, "I heard you playing, sounded good," and I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That pedal came," and she's like, and I was like, it just totally blew my mind. And she's like, "Oh, explain to me," and I was like, "Well, the best way," because she's not musical, she doesn't play an instrument, or she's just like being my wife and being nice and humoring me. But I told her, I was like, the best way I can describe it to you is like if you went into a studio with me, like recording the next record, imagine that the producer in there was like, "Here's a piece of pro audio gear that will make your guitar life easier and sound better. No matter how expensive your boutique amp is, it will still make it sound better." And that was my first impression. And I was like so pissed at myself because I was like, I'm going to shoot a video this week with it for my channel. And I was like, damn it, I should have waited. So you could have seen the look on my face when I first played it. Because I'm sure I was like, immediately. Because that's how it felt inside. Because, like what you were saying earlier, there's like, you have to be inspired. Like as a player, that's what I'm looking for. If I plug into a TS9 into an amp, okay, sounds like what every guitar tone sounds like, whatever. And then if I plug into something like this, and if it immediately kicks me in where the sun don't shine, and it's like, bro, wake up, listen to this, like I'm like, oh my gosh, and then I start playing all these things that I never would have played before. That is what I look for in everything I play, whether it be an instrument, pedal, an amp. It has to speak to me and it has to feel, and this is like the buzzword, but like it has to feel good under your fingers. And what I mean by that, from my personal experience, is like has to inspire me to play something different.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of like little components that go into that. I think like one of the things that's weird, when I was growing up working for Andy, right, there was a rule that if people were playing, you were recording. And we would go through lots of tape and we would have to reuse tape, and we had to do some things that weren't necessarily the greatest engineering in the world, or sometimes you just have like a digital deck running as a safety. And then like years later, I learned that this kind of was a standard thing in the studio world back in the 70s, because the whole thing about recording or watching music is about capturing inspiration, right? And capturing a moment, and everything should be about that moment. And like one of the reasons that my gear is super overbuilt, like an engineer might look in there and say, you don't need that, you don't need that, you don't need that, you don't need that. And it's totally true. It would pass signal just fine if I took out a bunch of that stuff. But it wouldn't necessarily be magical, and also it wouldn't necessarily be bulletproof. And when the moment of inspiration strikes, you probably know as well as anybody else, like if you have to futz with your gear, like to get, like if you have an idea and you turn on your amp and you're like, it doesn't sound right, and you're tweaking the knobs and you're finding all this stuff, everything, whenever the gear is getting in your way, it's destroying your moment of inspiration, because like that moment happens and it can pass. And if you are able to put on your guitar and play and get what is happening here to come out of there and press record at the same time, all of a sudden you can capture this moment, and that's what it's all about. So like building equipment that is like way overbuilt, right? It does not need all that stuff to just like pass signal. That's why most buffer like pedals are $40 or whatever, because it's just an op amp with a piece of wire wrapped around it, and nobody cares about anything else. But it doesn't inspire you, it doesn't create magic, and it may be kind of getting in your way a little bit. And so I took all these tricks from like inside that I learned from fixing Neves, or that I learned from working on audiophile gear, and anything that could be in there to improve the sound or improve like the transient response or the noise floor, it's all in there. And that's basically a template for all my other pedals. So like I built that fancy power supply, which is that, this is the power supply side of the board. This is a WAMP that's almost done. Power supply side of the board, it's like super overbuilt, because I want you to be able to take like an active guitar that puts out plus 12 and plug it into that thing, and it doesn't clip, because the signal should only clip when you hit your fuzz pedal or your distortion pedal. Like you should be able to get clean from here to there without being like, oh, well, the guitar probably only puts out, this many volts, and so it's okay if it clips here. It's like, it's not okay to me. There's 12 D of headroom in there that you do not need, right? Yeah. But it's like when you start hearing things like it feels better, or it sparkles, or it sounds more like my tone, or I can feel connected to my instrument, that's what all that stuff is. It's like, yeah, there's a little bit of extra headroom, there's a little bit lower noise floor. The capacitors are not electrolytics, which kind of like, especially in high impedance circuits, they don't sound good. So just don't use them. It's a little more expensive to use film caps, but you just use film caps, right? It sounds better. Everybody knows it sounds better. So all those little things just kind of add up cumulatively. And then you have a piece of gear it's just a little box of magic that makes it sound better. And when you open it up, it's like, I can tell you all the stuff that's like, why, like, yeah, a lot of people would just put an electro there. I put a film cap because it sounds better. I, double up on the output cap so it has like lower output series resistance on the output, just to get that little bit of extra drive capability. It's like probably 2 ohms, you know what I mean? It's nothing, but every little bit counts in some ways. And so you just kind of over engineer it, and then you're not surprised when it's good. Yeah. If you under engineer something, you're surprised when it's good. You're like, I just threw some mics on that cabinet, it sounds great. It's like, that is surprising because you didn't do anything. But when you over engineer something that's good, you're like, yeah, I knew it was going to be good because I over-engineered it,
There's a level of like smart to this stuff though. Like talking to someone like you, like I have a buddy who lives in upstate Maine. He has a company called Synaptic Amps. Mm-hmm. And do you know about those guys?
I don't think so. Let me write that down so I can check.
So he was like a neuroscience major, and then he just like got really interested in how like sound waves affect the brain and all that stuff, and then he's a big music fan, so he started building amps, and it like that was the first his amp was like the first boutique amp that I bought. So when I was living in Boston, his brother knew my wife, they were in grad school together, and she was like, you should talk to this dude, he wants to talk to you. And I went up to his studio, and I just like, he played drums, and I was playing through his amps, and I was like, wow, like what's the deal with this?
Yeah,
and like,
I'm looking at them now, they look really
cool. It's just like people like you guys would like really connect on this stuff, because it's like there's a level of smartness that's involved in this, and like it's not just smartness, it's like care and detail, attention to detail.
Well,
you know what I mean?
In some ways, I think the fun part, I mean, what maybe kind of speaks to your friend's journey with the amps, it's like, to me, the really fun part is to try to unpack the magic, right? Like everybody in the world will tell you that a 1073 is one of the best sounding mic preamps ever made. But why? What's in it, right? When you look at the schematic's not particularly special. It's an amplifier. So you look at the construction methodology and the component choice and like, you know, where they chose to spend some money and where they, you know, how they shorten the signal path and all the things they do. And you start to unpack these things like, I really love talking to audiophiles and people who are really, really like superstitious about their sound, because they'll tell you like, you know, oh, I only use unshielded solid core mic cable because it sounds better. And it's like, okay, well, let's check it out. Because I think it's really fun to unpack those things and to find like, where is the grain of truth buried under all of that kind of hype and nonsense? You know, like people started to love this pedal or that pedal. And, you know, they start to think it's magic and they say, oh, this one, you know, the original sounds better than the copy. And you say, okay, why? What's different about it, right? If they successfully copied the circuit, why would the other one sound better? And you open it up and it's like, oh yeah, because they did this and they did that. And the people who copied it didn't know that that was important. And they took it out because it's expensive, you know, like I use tantalum caps in a couple places inside Euna, and it's because they have a really specific like feel to them. Capacitors don't really have feel, but they have a bit of a sound that is good. And I got that from fixing 1073s, because anywhere that it's really important, especially if there's a high impedance point, it's like there's a tantalum cap there. And it is called out on the schematic. There's a little T on the original schematics that Neve drew, because it sounds better in that place. And if you put an electro there, it doesn't sound as good. And if you put a tantalum there, it sounds better. So on mine, it's like, okay, put a tantalum there. You know what I mean? It's not like, if you spend enough of your time unpacking these things and trying to figure out where the grains of truth are, you can build stuff that sounds really good. You know, like your friend's amps look amazing. And it looks like, yeah, he is interested in how sound affects people. And, you know, you start to say like, well, yeah, like a lot of times in, you know, less expensive gear, one of the things you see is just like a lot of weird noise or frequency drop off or like phase weirdness outside of the audio band, right? So outside of 20 to 20, people just pretend like it doesn't matter. And it absolutely does matter. You know, yeah, it's like diminishing returns. And that last 10% of perfect phase response is incredibly expensive. And so people don't usually bother with it. But where you can tighten up the phase response, it will sound better. You know what I mean? It's not rocket science. Like, why do champs feel so immediate? And everybody plugs right into a champ and they go, oh, this is great. And like sometimes, you know, you use a different amp because you need some features, you need some volume, or champ doesn't work for everything. But how come when you plug into a champ, it just feels like you're physically connected to the amp? And it's because it's a really short signal path with just a few components in it. Phase response is pretty good. You know, like all that kind of stuff that sometimes seems like overkill when you're trying to engineer it. You know, it's like it absolutely makes a difference. And if you can capture that in something like a pedal, then, you know, you can just help people find their sound, you know?
Yeah, it's so cool, man. And I want to play a little bit. Is this, you can tell me if, you know what, let me turn my amp on.
A little bit.
You can tell me if this is peaking or not.
Seems pretty good.
Okay. So I am playing through a Two Rock Studio Signature right now, which was a midlife crisis purchase. And I sold a bunch of amps to get it because I've been wanting to get a Two Rock since probably like in the early 2000s.
Yeah, they're really nice amps.
Yeah, and it's like it's the thing is, as I get older, I guess it's like my ears are trying to find HD. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and that's what Euna is too, man. It's like an HD world. But
well, yeah, if you plugged into the Two Rock with a cable that's like this long, that's basically what it sounds like plugging into Euna. And so it gives you that sound, like it lets you run the direct amp kind of sound through your pedal board, which is
it's great. So this is just the clean tone of the Two Rock. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I put Euna on,
and like now when you do want that warmer sound, you can use the tone knob to get it, and you're not like beholden to the darker tone, right? Like I'm working up a little mod suite because some people like that sort of darker tone that hangs on the guitar a bit, and they say, oh, I use a coily cable that's 40 feet long because I just like that extra capacitance and the way it makes the pickup sound. I think that's cool. I mean, if that's a thing that you like the sound of, it's great. I think it's, for me as an engineer, it's like, well, I want to be able to get the full bandwidth tone and then choose to make it smaller when I want to, like with the tone knob or with another pedal or something like that. But I'm working on a little mod suite for a few players who are like, I'm just used to that 40-foot coily cable, and like this took that away. So I'm like, okay, well, we'll work on that. I can actually make it do that. But I think that it's more that like if you sort of reevaluate your relationship with the tone knob and the relationship with your amp's like brightness, you don't really need that, and you'll find that it's a lot more versatile, because now what you can do is you can roll that tone back a little bit for your sort of meat and potatoes playing, and then when you do need to have a little lead line that speaks out a bit, you can just open up the tone a bit, and it'll just kind of speak more without necessarily sounding like brighter or pokier or having to do anything or turn anything up. You can just kind of like get that little bit of extra like breath up top. It makes a little line come out,
So as far as like the switches on this and everything, like the low brilliance and then the harmonics.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, dude, I just like having them all on.
Yeah.
It just, now granted, this guitar is in C standard tuning, so this is the Madison Cunningham tuning.
Yeah.
But I just, when I was messing with it, I was like, okay, what happens if I take the harmonics out and if I just leave the low and the brilliance on? I'm like, okay, oh, I want that back in there. What happens if I just take the brilliance? And it's the same thing every time. I'm like, I just want them all on.
The curve that's created when they're all on is a pretty pleasing curve for most guitars. And so I worked really hard so that like none of the settings should sound bad. Some just may sound more good. I usually use mine flat because I've been dialing in my guitars and my amps and my rig for so long that like I kind of like my bass tone is set up for flat. And then when I switch to another guitar, I can use those switches to kind of like get more sounds. But I mean, the curve that happens when all of them are on is a pretty pleasing curve. I mean, that's why, I built it that way. So you could have them all on and it would be all good. And it's, it's a little bump in the low end, a little bump where a normal brightness would be on a guitar amp. And then the harmonics is a bump up in the air band so that like, there's no fundamentals up there. So you're just turning up like kind of the harmonics that get a little buried, and then because it's a boost up there, it may like hit your amp a little harder or hit your pedals a little harder, which will create a little THD, but just up in that nice sort of sparkly zone. And because Euna itself is still super clean, even with all the switches on. That's one of the reasons why it has to be so high headroom, is that like even after you put the switches on, it's still like 0.0000, nothing THD.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like, it never feels pokey. It never feels like it's kind of ear piercingly, even when I'm up high.
Yeah.
And I don't feel, even when I have like, I'll put the Gladio on with it. It never, for me, it's never ice picky. That's the one thing about playing a Telly or playing a Strat. And, and I love these Suhr guitars. It's way different than when I pick up my Fender Strat. For some reason, I have Texas Specials in that one. I'm thinking about putting different pickups in that, but like that guitar is super harsh. But like I have a feeling that if I put this in front of it, it wouldn't be.
It could be. I mean, when you have a guitar that's harsh like that, the nice thing about Tellys, especially the reason I have so many Tellys kicking around, is that I love that you can just pop the control plate off and mod it. And a lot of times, changing the relationship between the pickups and the tone knob and changing what tone cap is in there can have a really big impact. And so even though there's so many great pickups you can drop in there, but if you're having that relationship, like plug it into Euna and see, maybe that pickup, those pickups are just having a hard time, holding that resonant peak up when the pedals are hanging on it. So Euna might help it push that resonant peak back out to where it doesn't sound pokey and harsh anymore and sounds kind of airy. And then also once you have that set up, you can pop the cover off the Telly and like look and see what the value of the tone pot is, and increase the value of the tone pot or change the value of the tone cap. Because especially once a guitar is yours, you might as well mod it to be exactly what you want it to be. Because like all these values that we put in these things, we're trying our best to make the thing that will work the best for the most people. So it turns out like, yeah, 250K pot and a 0.22, 0.022 cap is pretty good for most people. And so we leave it in there. And a lot of people don't notice if you use like a ceramic or a cheaper cap in there. But then, people get these guitars and they say, oh, I want to change the value of the cap a little bit. Like I put like, for some weird reason, I tend to like the typical Fender value caps in Gibson style circuits and the typical Gibson value caps in Fender style circuits. There's just something I like about the balance of it. Yeah, because when I go to roll off the control on the telly, I want it to get really dark, because that probably means I have the big muff turned on and the bright switch on the amp and like all this cool stuff. So I need it to go, and not. So I put bigger caps inside the tellies and stuff, because that's how I use the tone knob on the telly. Whereas on like a Gibson style guitar, I tend to use it a little more gingerly, and I don't often play with that kind of sound. And so I like to just be able to back a little bit of it, get a little thing like that. And so use the Fender style cap, which is, going to be the corner frequency is going to be a little higher. So it can never get super dark like that. But those pickups tend to be kind of big and meaty anyway in Gibson style guitars. And, I just find that balance works better for me. But, it certainly doesn't work well for everybody, or they would be doing it.
That's so interesting, man. I've never even thought or fathomed like the idea of doing something like that with like taking a different manufacturer's like, I guess, intended use and just like, oh, let's put that in this other manufacturer's guitar and see what happens.
Oh, I do it with everything. I mean,
That's
it's like
great.
I've just Frankensteined everything in here backwards and forwards 100 times, and it's like after a while you start to find the things that work for you. And so sometimes it's hard to like you're trying to make something that's going to market, right? And you're trying to say like because like I said, I'm considering doing a little mod suite where it's just like I'll tell you a set of values that work if you like a fundamentally darker tone, so that you can put this thing in front of your board and it'll work for you. But one of the reasons that I'm trying to encourage it to be a DIY thing is that like, well, I think that once you get into doing that, you're going to run the risk of being like, everybody's going to want something a little different, because everybody should want something a little different, right? I mean, you and I are both cooks, and that like you cook something different depending on who's there, and you like your food a little spicier than somebody else, or like, I can't get enough like black pepper. I just love black pepper in everything. And some people might not like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm encouraging people to like get out the soldering iron and say like, listen, if you want it to be darker, it's easier to make it darker than it is to make it brighter. So there's little like notes on the PCB, and you can find your own little values and your own things. You have to be able to work on surface mount stuff, which is a little challenging for some hobbyists. But I think once you get used to it, I actually think it's easier to work on the surface mount stuff. And that way you can know that you made it perfect for you. Like the video I have up on YouTube that talks about making Euna, I as a joke in the front, I built it because I have a lot of trust issues. And that is true. Like I built it because I wanted to know that the front end of my signal path was built by me, and that I had measured it, and I knew exactly what it was doing to my tone, because I wanted to be able to trust all the things that happen after it. I mean, you go to enough studios and enough venues, and some days the guitar just doesn't sound right. And you're kind of like, okay, why? Why today does it just not sound good? Right? It's the same amp, same pedal board, same speaker. Maybe it's a different room, or maybe you feel differently. Maybe it's a different brand of strings. All these kind of variables. There's so many variables in music, and being able to put a few like fixed points I think can really help build trust. Like, I took the time a few years ago to like listen to 12 different brands of guitar strings, and like, okay, which ones do I actually like the sound of better, so that I can know that I listened and I chose. And then once you choose, you don't have to do it all the time. Like, I'm not a person who constantly does shootouts, but every now and then I will do something like buy 100 different guitar picks and just sit around and listen to 100 different guitar picks. It's something that I learned from John Bryan. When I was working for John, he would do stuff like that occasionally. One day he wanted to know like what type of wire sounds good, right? And so we built up, a whole guitar rig's worth of wires out of 3 different types of wire. So we could listen and decide. And we listened, and he decided what he liked better. And then after that, it's just like, he doesn't have to worry about it. He knows how much difference it makes. So he knows when he can omit it or not, right? Like if somebody has a different type of wire, he knows it makes this much difference. And so he's like, yeah, when I can, I use the kind I like because it sounds this much better. But, you know, you don't have to worry about it anymore because you never have to worry like, okay, how is my cable affecting my sound? You know, because a lot of us, you know, you start down that journey and you might be like, I've heard that the cable affects the sound. I see that there are some guitar cables that are like hundreds of dollars, you know, and some guitar cables that are like $10. And so somewhere in the middle is the reasonable alternative for me. You know, like I'm not a person who's going to spend, you know, $700 on a guitar cable, but I might spend $100 on the cable from my input to my Euna because that's the high impedance point where it's super critical. You know, one thing you learn from working on mics is that the high impedance points are where things are super critical because so much signal loss can occur there. So in a tube mic, I don't know if you're familiar with what transistors look like or whatever, but you know, on a tube mic or a transistor mic that's a large diaphragm, the high Z point, high impedance point for the capsule is so high that there's two 1 gig resistors around it. That's 1 gig ohm, which means, you know, 1,000 megs, right? So 2,000 meg resistors create this high impedance point, and even the substrate material of the PCB adds capacitance at that impedance, right? Because as you go up in impedance, the capacitance affects it more and more and more. Smaller and smaller amounts of capacitance make a big difference. So you float the leg of the transistor or the tube. So like the leg of the transistor that touches the output of the capsule actually doesn't go through the PC board and through a trace. You lift both of them up because even that material at that point becomes capacitive. And if you don't lift it far enough off the board, you'll hear that it's darker. And, you know, guitars aren't that high impedance, but I try to use some of those principles. Like the path from the guitar jack to Euna, it's not like a length of wire that somebody ran that is random, right? That they, sometimes I clip it 3 inches, sometimes I clip it 3.5 inches. It's like a ½ inch of copper that's this wide, you know. It's like way bigger than it needs to be, way heavier than it needs to be, and very, very short because every little bit matters at that high impedance point. But then after it, you know, I use regular molded, patch cables after that. Like there's some really good ones made by Tour Gear Designs that I got because they fit my pedals really nicely. Like the sort of close together jacks on the back of Euna, they can fit those. So I bought them all for that. And, you know, they're molded cables with their high quality wire. And so you don't need to spend $1 jillion on, you know, your patch cables after your high impedance point. Now, the next place where it becomes critical is that high impedance point to your amp. So the output of your board then is pretty critical, but not as much as the input, because at that point, depending on your output driver, you might have lower output drive. And that's what this guy's going to do next year.
Right. Oh, okay. So what are your favorite cables to use then?
I mean, I make all of them.
I was gonna say, I bet you make.
Yeah, one of the shootouts that we did was like brands of connectors, and so I know what connectors I like the sound of. It's a really, really minor difference. It is not enough to really worry about it if you don't want to take the time. But then I use console wire because it's really low capacitance, and I'll show you one of them actually.
Yeah, man. I'd be interested. I'm starting to go down that rabbit hole of I don't want to spend $100 on a cable, but like I have some Megami cables that were like, I think they were only $35 or $40 a cable for a 10-foot cable.
They're pretty good. I mean, we use Megami wire a lot in studios, but when I was wiring studios, I had to deal with a lot of wire, and the Megami wire tends to be a little lighter than I think the gauge actually says. You know, when you get like Belden 22 gauge and Megami 22 gauge, the Belden feels stiffer. And, you know, Megami puts like silk inside there to make it a little more supple and a little easier to roll. But like, I'm a little mistrustful of extra stuff next to the wire other than like the jacket material. So like this is Belden console wire, and it's pretty thin, but it works really well. I use these in the studio because I think they sound better, but they're a little microphonic, so I don't tend to take them on the road. On the road, I'll use, you know, maybe some of the Megami instrument stuff or maybe some of the Belden instrument stuff that they make. And the little square plugs sound really good. And I encourage everybody to make cables because even if you don't make all your cables, like I still buy them from, you know, like I said, I bought the Tour Gear ones and stuff. but I make a lot of them because I think it's important to just have your hands in your equipment. Like you start to understand how important it is to have good gear and to know how to work your gear. And I guess I also just got in the habit of doing it because I was a broke musician for so long, and like I needed to have a relatively good guitar cable, but it's expensive to go buy the ones at Guitar Center that are way overpriced. But there are some companies out there that make like use really high quality wire, really high quality materials, hand make everything. It's totally worth it to buy one of those, especially for the input from your guitar to the pedal board. I wouldn't worry too much about it for the interconnects between the pedals because they tend to be lower impedance points. And you may find, like, for instance, the one from, if you use Euna for the fuzz pedal loop, you may find that one also probably needs to be something really nice because when you switch out Euna, that becomes a high impedance point. And so, like, the rule of thumb is like change one thing at a time and see if it makes a difference. So I don't like endorse any specific brands of these nice cables, but I will say that there's a difference between ones that say they're magic and ones that just say like we're human beings who built it by hand using really nice components. And there's somebody I was looking at the other day from my distributor. They have a cable company in their brands, and I was checking out their stuff. Sinusoid. They look really nice. And what I liked about them is they basically like, we have a few different brands of wire that we use, and we have a few different brands of connectors you can choose from, and we'll hand make you something really nice out of really nice materials. And that's sort of like what Euna is. It's like, I'm not trying to tell you that it's magic or anything. I'm just trying to say, like, I built it with using nice materials, and that's why it's good.
It's like cooking with love, man. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like when you cook a meal and you put some love into it, man, it just tastes that much better. It's the same thing with this pedal. It's the same damn thing. I mean,
to me, it's almost like the difference between, like, some of the audiophile stuff is like the difference between using like lime juice from a bottle and squeezing a lime. There are certain circumstances where you're not going to be able to tell the difference, and it's much more convenient to have the bottle, and that's fine. And then there are certain circumstances in which, like, fresh lime juice in a margarita is just better than lime juice from a jar. And so you squeeze the limes for the margarita. And finding those things in your signal chain, right? Like, finding out for yourself, like, okay, like I started putting 11s on a few of my tellies because, like, it really does help those pickups speak, I think, because, back in the day when, we're obsessed with these designs from the 50s, right? But back in the 50s, the people would have had 11s and 12s on a telly because that's what there was. And you put them on there and yeah, it's harder to bend, but it sounds better. And so on the guitar that you don't do a lot of bending on, like, yeah, put some 12s in that telly. That sounds amazing. The telly you don't like that much, try putting some like, pure nickel 12s on there and like see if it doesn't change how you feel about the guitar. Because it's like, it can really make a big difference. And then you find some things don't make a big difference and you don't worry about it.
Yeah. I mean, that one is the guitar in question is a Strat, and it's like it was my first, like, I played Les Pauls growing up until 9th grade, and then I feel like I don't know who I heard playing a Strat. It wasn't Hendrix, but I heard someone playing a Strat, and I was like, oh, I like that better. I like that sound better. But that guitar has 13s on it in standard.
Nice.
This guitar is 16 to 63, 62, something like that on this guitar. Yeah, C standard. And then same thing goes for when I play an open C. It's I think it's 17 to 64 or something like that. But regardless, when I started, when I was talking to Joey, he was like, try 19 to like 65 or whatever. And then I did that for a while and it felt fine. But then I was like, when I started playing in C standard, and I go through String Joy too. I love their strings, but he was like, try this instead of going that high for the C standard and tell me what you think. And this just felt better. It just felt like I was playing, because on my standard tuning guitar, there are 11s on that. On my other Sir, that's in standard, besides the gold Strat in question. But it does, like, there's a difference, and there's a difference when I hear those guitars recorded too, like the one with 11s and then this one.
Yeah.
And that's like what I was telling you. I really am in love with the darker tone, and then I think also too, playing in this lower tuning, that's why I gravitate towards it. And I play piano too, so like I always am in the lower register when I'm playing piano. And I think there's just something about the darkness that I like. I don't know what it is.
It's also cool to just like to try to take an instrument, especially once you have a few instruments laying around, you can do this, to take an instrument and not worry about it being versatile. Like I have 40 guitars in here and some of them are only good for one thing. And, but that's cool. And you can like start to mix and match these things because like, okay, the guitar that doesn't sound good in standard may sound good in an open tuning. And once it's in an open tuning, you can explore different string gauges and you might find this like magic combination where you're like, yeah, the gold Strat wasn't that much of a winner when I did this with it, but then I started using it as like a Nashville guitar, and like tuning it in Nashville works really well for it. I mean, I think it's really cool that you're playing around with that because there was a minute where I was like arguing with a friend of mine about like I was trying to liberate their mind from like that scale length means something other than scale length. Because people say like, oh, you need a baritone, so you need baritone scale. And I was like, you don't actually need baritone scale just to get the guitar to go down to C. You just need to put heavier strings on it. And then, a telly tuned down to C with heavier strings is going to feel and sound a little more like a short scale guitar because of the tension. And short scale guitars feel cool and people love them. So like, a short scale Mustang or something like that has a similar feel to a telly with heavy strings tuned down. And it actually made me like my tellies a lot more when I started doing that. And then similarly, I have that guitar behind me, the Jazzmaster looking one. It's got getting new strings on it right now because it is a baritone scale, but I'm putting standard. I'm putting actually like 9s or 10s on it and tuning it up to standard because it's like when you're strumming, those big jumps at the bottom don't matter that much. And then when you do go to play lead, you have more room up here. And if you can imagine the difference between like, all of the things being equal of Gibson scale and a Fender scale and kind of the slight difference in tone. Well, if you just go one next thing out, that's like taking a baritone scale guitar and putting standards on it and tuning it up. It's like, it's really zingy. It's like, it's bright is the wrong word, but it's in the way that Fenders have fewer overtones than, Fender scale has fewer overtones than Gibson scale. Well, then long scale has even fewer overtones. And so you get an even purer kind of sound. And so for guitar, for like chords and stuff, it's really cool. I'm not an amazing lead player, so I haven't checked it out playing like lead, but I would encourage people to do that.
I love how you're flipping pancakes, man, on all this stuff. Like I love how there's like this dichotomy of like the antithesis. Let's take this on the other side of the fence to see what we can explore and find. Like that's the stuff that like cool stuff comes out of it. And like, so Euna, and then like now your new thing that's going to be coming out.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff I'm working on. I mean, this is a prototype of WAMP, and WAMP is like, it's a similar concept to Euna, but it's for the output. And so it uses a different op amp and the circuit's a little different, but it also makes gain in 2 stages. So like it'll make 30 dB of gain, but it does it by actually changing the gain of the amp of the pedal, so that when you don't need the gain, it's not like all the gain is there and you're just rolling the level down, because that affects the noise floor and the feel of it. So when you don't need the gain, you can just ungain the amp circuit. It's like that, and then you save yourself the noise, but you still kind of get the feeling of it turned up because it is turned up. It just isn't making that much gain. And then you start adding these switches, and it creates 30 dB of gain. And the front stage has a bright switch and the back stage has a dark switch. So you can actually have like bright and dark on at the same time, and it creates a nice little shape up top. And then there's a knob to dial in. I'm calling it presence because it's sort of like presence on a Fender amp, but it's basically like a way to put the sort of mid scoop of a Fender Deluxe on a knob, so that like, you can pull it back and it's even deeper than a Fender would be. Somewhere around here is kind of just the shape of an amp. And one of the things I like about it, sort of like Euna is designed to swap out with your fuzz pedal, you could swap this out with something else. Like I just got a really awesome Soma from Greer. He's a really nice guy, and we were just chatting on Instagram, and we decided to trade pedals. So I traded him a Euna for a Soma, and it's awesome. And it basically is like, I use it as an alternate output driver to my WAMP because I have a WAMP finished on my board. And so what that means is like on WAMP, I can set the gain the way I like and set the level the way I need, and then dial in some sweet like scoopy mids for the chording. And then I switch this actually fully out of the circuit, and it goes up to the Soma, and the Soma I push the mids on and I make it a little dirty. So now I kind of have amp switching, channel switching. And so for people that are using like recording direct or using cab sims, or maybe don't have channel switching on the amp, or even just have like a pedal platform kind of amp that they don't want to mess with the sound of. Like I love champ style circuits, but they don't have that mid scoop that I really like. So my little champ with this in front of it kind of can get that cool sound of a deluxe or of like scoopy mid sort of chording sound, but then you switch it out and then you're just hitting it with the Greer and it gets nice and creamy for the for the lead stuff.
Man, that's awesome. I haven't played any of Nick's pedals, and I actually sent him a message on Instagram about having him on here because I've been
Really nice guy.
yeah, he seems like it. He seems like a super genuine, awesome human being. But I really want to. I've heard so many good things about the Lightspeed.
Yeah, I was almost going to trade him for one of those instead, and I picked the Soma because it has some different EQ features, and I thought it would work best in my application. But I think I'll eventually pick up a bunch more of his stuff because it's like he really cares about it, and he really tries to make stuff that's unique. And I try to make stuff that's unique as well. You know, like I try not to give any grief to people that are like making like clones of things. I think like I make clones for myself. Like I have a Big Muff clone that I built myself that is on my board, but I'm not going to market that and sell it and just put a different name on it. You know,
right? Yeah.
I like coming up with my own stuff and making my own stuff. So that's like, it's not just copying somebody else's circuit. I think the exception I make for that is like people who are working really hard to continue something that isn't being made anymore. So like, you know, people that are remaking old treble boosters and old fuzz pedals, and they're like going to the trouble to find all these old transistors. Like God bless them for digging up all these old transistors and all these old parts so that a person like you or me could get one. You know, like I have two of Chris Vincent's R2R pedals. I have one of his treble boosters and one of his fuzzes because they're amazing. And he makes them in a really great way, and he listens to every single one and hand matches every single one. And so he's like measuring transistors and batching the transistors and then measuring old resistors because they've probably drifted and finding the exact right match that makes the exact thing. And so each one is kind of like sculpted by him through like hundreds and hundreds of parts.
That's
and
crazy,
it's
man.
really labor intensive and really time consuming. So like I don't consider that a clone in the way I'm talking about, because he's doing something so unique. I mean, like, you know, you get a circuit board made, you know, you copy the schematic of something, you get a circuit board made, you make it with garden variety parts, and you put a cool name on it. It's not, you know, there's room for that because I guess there is, but I just don't think that's super cool to do because like I would feel bad if somebody copied my circuit, and so I don't copy other people's circuits.
Right.
Once you've made a circuit of your own from the ground up, you feel differently about, you know, like a friend of mine asked me to build a treble booster that's like the Pete Cornish one, which has his buffer up front and then his version of Arrangemaster in the back. And I built it for my friend because, you know, it was fun to build. And I thought for a second, I was like, oh, maybe I'll put this out. And then I went to, you know, Pete's website. Pete is still around and he still makes them. And they're expensive because he makes them, you know, by hand. And it's like, you know what, if I took even one sale away from that guy, I would feel really bad. And, you know, like, because that's his design, right? He put those elements together and he built them himself. And that's what made that sound famous, other than Brian May being awesome. And so like, you know, I kind of tend to stay away from that. So that's why sometimes the development process takes me a long time. I picked this up to show you as well. This is like a sort of preamp or drive pedal that I'm working on.
Oh, cool.
And it's like, it's got a breadboard sitting on top of one of my chassis so I can just plug components into it. And then once it's done, I make the PCB. And this one's pretty cool. It makes a ton of gain. It's not super clean like the other stuff. It's got 2 op-amp stages and 2 discrete transistor stages. You know, it's doing pretty good. But it's probably still 6 months away because, you know, like in between building things and talking to customers and doing all that other stuff and just trying to keep up with production, I don't have a ton of time to finish that stuff right now. But there's a bunch of cool stuff on the docket. Like that's almost done. You know what I would like actually to ask you about this.
Mm-hmm.
So your guy uses a lot of pedals.
Yes, I do.
This is a design I've been kicking around, and I have a prototype of it, and I can't decide if anybody thinks it was cool. So since people are watching the show, you can write and tell me if you think this is cool. Are you familiar with how like noise reduction works in like really early noise reduction in studios?
Like that much.
So before the technology got really fancy, the way you did it was with an encode curve and a decode curve, meaning you would push high end on the way in and cut high end on the way out. And because the two EQ stages were matched perfectly, you got out the audio that you put in, more or less, with less noise, because you had done this to it on the way in and you did this to it on the way out. And it's just a fascinating concept because you can use it in a really cool way creatively. So this is a prototype that I haven't told anybody about yet. You're the first person I'm telling about this.
Oh, snap. Exclusive.
And so your viewers can tell me if you think it's cool enough that I should finish it, because I kind of can't decide, because what it does is subtle, and it's like a big pedal to have to do something subtle. But basically, it's still insert, input, send, return, output, right? The input to the send is an encode EQ, and the return to the output is a decode EQ. And it's on this knob so that when it's flat, both circuits are flat. And when you turn the knob up, right, this curve goes like this, and this curve goes like that. But you can also turn it the other way. And so this curve goes like that, and this curve goes like that. And so the resulting waveform, when nothing is distorting, is the same because the EQs are perfectly matched. But as soon as you introduce a little elements of distortion, and especially because this is adding gain in one direction or the other, when you do it, it will distort a pedal that you put in here. So you can like put a tube screamer in here and hit it with a little extra top end to get it to like smooth out on the top a bit and distort a little earlier in the upper part than the lower part. But then the resulting tone isn't brighter that you have to cut, right? Because it cuts the tone back. Mm-hmm. And so in extreme cases, it can make a tube screamer sound like a fuzz face, because it's like just blowing up the input of it with all this low end that it is not expecting. And in other ways, you can use it as a bit of noise reduction, like for noisier pedals. And you could put a whole grip of pedals in there and then do it. And it's like, I've had it sitting around here for probably about a year. And it was the second thing I designed after I was done with Euna. And I just kind of put it on the shelf, and I haven't made any of them. I didn't even finish the PC board yet. This is like a modded prototype. Because I don't know how excited people would be about it. And some of my other ideas, like once I get finished with, Euna, the input driver, WAMP, the output driver, I've got a preamp type pedal and an overdrive type pedal. And then after that, they start to get a little weirder, and I don't know how people will respond to it. Like trying to explain this in a video, you know what I mean? It's like if I put it on a thing, I wonder if I can.
I mean, there's definitely a market for that, and now, albeit it might be niche. I think there's a market for that, not only for like studio, but also what about a lot of these players that are playing super high gain stuff that's like, and they're using some of these what's the pedal, is it Boss has that like decibel destroyer or something, I can't remember what it's called, but like it's super gated and stuff, it doesn't sound natural. Now that sometimes for that kind of music, and I don't play that type of music, so other people who do, you can correct me, but like I don't know if that gated sound is part of it, or if there could be more usefulness with something like that to tame it so it doesn't sound so like because
you know
what I mean.
A lot of noise reduction guitar pedals are like they have gates in them, and a gate never sounds good unless you're doing it on purpose. Like if you're trying to dial in a gated sound, you can do it, but if it's just like trying to do this to the noise, it's like I don't know.
Right, unless you're Tom Morello and you're using a kill switch, I don't really want to hear that. I don't want to hear that noticeably, but I think there's a market for that. And man,
it sounds okay, right? Like when I like with a lot of my stuff, the pitch is a little weird, where the pitch is like, okay, I have to explain to you how noise reduction used to work in the 70s, that it doesn't work this way anymore, and that's kind of how you get to what this pedal does. It's like a bit of a tough sell sometimes.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is like, and even for a noob like me, where I don't have the technical mindset like you do at all. Like sometimes my buddy with Synaptic Amps, I'll be like, all right, bud, dumb it down. Please dumb it down. Steve, bring it down here to me. And I think for like someone like me using Euna as just a guy, like all of my videos and all my pedals, I want it to be like I just walked into a guitar shop and I don't know what this thing does, plug it into it, see if I like it, kind of thing. And I think that the more videos you have like that with people that are just like, this is why I think it's cool, this is rad because this is the application and how I use it and how I will utilize it.
Yeah.
That sells it on its own, man. Like, I mean, because there's some people that can keep up with you. I can't, in terms of like on that level.
I think you can, sometimes people don't give themselves enough credit. I think like, because I use engineering terms, it sounds like I, speaking in a code you don't understand, but you can just replace those engineering terms often with like descriptive terms like, warm and dark and things like that. And I think sometimes, engineers obfuscate things on purpose sometimes. And I try not to do that. I try to talk in like regular terms. But sometimes there's just not a great descriptive word other than the engineering term, and I don't know. I think also some people like who talk in technical terms like me, we're just obsessed with nomenclature. Like what is a this and what is a that?
That's understandable though. I mean, I think I like learning about that stuff too. And I wish I knew more about it. So like for me, having a conversation with you about this is a blessing because I feel like I'm kind of starting to get it and understand it. And like, as the older I get, like I said, the more I want to understand how my gear works and I want to be able to make it work optimally.
Well, I think sometimes it's just a matter of applying what you know about it already to like the next level down, right? It's just like, it's like going from, you probably make a great sausage and pepper, meal, right? And you bought the sausage at the store. And the only difference is that now you want to make your own sausage. And so you got to just unpack that last little bit that you don't know about. And then like once you start making your own sausage, who knows, you might want to like, I want to raise my own pigs. And like, okay, there you go. I'm going to raise pig, and like, I'm one of those people that I like to keep going down that little hole. And so like, you have a real intuitive understanding of your instrument and your board and the sounds and things like that. So there's not as much in there that you don't understand as you think, right? You probably understand more of it than you think. It's just a matter of breaking it down. Like sometimes somebody asked me the other day, like, is WAMP a preamp or a drive pedal? And I'm like, well, like, I'm not trying to be like pedantic about it, but those aren't technical terms, right? Those are terms for how you're using something. And so if you use something as a drive pedal, it's a drive pedal. If you use something as a preamp, it's a preamp. Once you look inside an amplifier circuit, the technical definitions of amplifiers have nothing to do with whether they are a preamp or a gain circuit. Like these amps are just normal amplifiers that are sometimes optimized to do a certain job. So like a preamp is essentially like an input converter that makes clean gain, right? And has headroom. And that's what's important about that. And there may be another type of amplifier like a drive pedal. It's not important that it have headroom, right? Because you are happy for it to distort. You're trying to make it distort. So but other than that, they're really similar circuits. It's like it's transistors making gain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, okay, a preamp pedal kind of implies that it has EQ, right? So if it has a little EQ, but it also is a drive pedal, is it a preamp pedal? It's like, it depends on how you use it. And I think sometimes designers call things by how they intended you to use it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it that way,
Right. Yeah. That's refreshing because sometimes, did you see that episode that the pedal show guys did on the whole concept of the preamp pedal?
I didn't watch that one yet. I was working that week when that one came out, and so I didn't watch that one yet, but I'm going to catch up on that one. I usually watch all theirs, but that's one I didn't catch yet.
I think you would find it interesting. And I was pretty blown away. And the Gladio was on there. And like, I don't think, Emilio had ever planned on like boasting that is a preamp pedal. He doesn't really. It's almost like a Dumble in a box kind of thing, which, well, it's a Robin Ford in a box kind of thing. So, but it was really interesting to see how different like the Kingsley stuff is.
Yeah.
Because that's a true preamp, like how they were using it. It was just like, and the idea of like, how are you using these tools? How do you want to express yourself with this stuff is a very close to the heart kind of a concept for me as a player, And
when you think about it, I come from the world of like audio engineering and studios. And so I see a pedal board and what I see is a modular channel strip, right? Modular channel strip includes a preamp, includes some compression, includes some EQ. And, so the whole thing is a preamp, right? In the way that like a 1073 is a channel strip, but a 1073 is also a preamp. It's got a little preamp section. It's got a little EQ section. Is it a preamp if you don't have the EQ? Well, yeah, I guess if you use it that way. So like the whole pedal board is a preamp, right? You got your input stage, you got your coloring stages and you have your output stage. And whether or not you focus on any of them, like you might just let your delay pedal's output buffer act like the drive stage because it's sufficient for your purpose. And so you don't need an output driver on your pedal board because your delay pedal is the last in your chain and it's perfectly good at driving a line, because a lot of them are, but a lot of them aren't. And you put a drive pedal at the end, or you put like something like WAMP at the end, and you find like, oh, my little Boss course pedal that I love that is at the end of my chain can't actually drive 40 feet of cable without losing any low end. And so I put this other thing in between it, and now it lets it work again. Because like your amplifier has a preamp and a power amp, right? And so to have and your whole pedal board is essentially a preamp because it is before the amplifier. So then if you have a preamp on your preamp going into your preamp, you know what I mean? It's like you start layering all these terms and you realize like a lot of them are just helping you describe to yourself how you're using it so you can know where you're going to make a change. To me, like preamp implies clean gain, drive pedal implies dirty gain. And that's not true for everybody's preamp pedal because some people make a preamp pedal that is dirty on purpose. And so it's like, okay, you kind of build your own little rig and you think about it, at least I think about it like that's one of the reasons why I like using the insert loop, because it's like, here's the clean Euna front end, and then here's the fuzz pedal, and that's my input stage. And it's either clean or dirty, right? And that's how I think about it. And that way it goes out to my other drive pedals, which are like the center section, the EQ section of my modular, channel strip pedal board. And then it's got an output driver at the end that kicks it out to wherever it needs to go.
Yeah, man. Well, you need to know, man, you have a huge, big new fan. I can't wait to see what else you kind of roll out with, because this has been like a fun week getting to play with this thing. And cool. Every single night, I mean, you've seen it like on Instagram every single night. Well, I try to do those 5 p.m. cranking amps as much as I possibly can, like 2 or 3 times a week. And I can't not turn the Euna on like this week. It's just like so much fun to play. So big fanboy here now, man.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad it's working out for people. And I'm glad it does the thing that I want it to do for people. It was a bit of a hard road to develop it because until it existed, it was a difficult concept to sell people on. Before anyone had bought one, I made 15 or 20 and I gave them to a lot of guitar players that I know that I really like. And they're all very gracious because they're my friends. And, but it was a bit of a challenge to sort of like explain the concept when I was like, I'm going to mail you this pedal and you need to plug your guitar right into it and then put your fuzz pedal in the loop. And it doesn't actually make any gain, but like it's kind of doing what a preamp does, except it doesn't make any gain. And it's like, but once people can hear it and once people go like, oh yeah, I see what it does in my rig, almost everybody's really happy with it. And that's really pleasing to me. I hope my fingers are crossed. Like I was going to put out WAMP in October and then I decided to pull it for a few months to wait till January, just so I could like build a few more of them and send them to a few more friends and get a bit more feedback, because I'm really hoping that WAMP is as special as Euna is, because then I would feel really good and I would start making weirder stuff and not feeling bad about it.
I can't wait to see that, man. That's going to be great. Well, you ready to do this lightning round?
I didn't prepare for the lightning round at all.
Well, that's the way it goes, my friend.
Okay.
So what we're going to do, and I think you know the rules here, but
tell me the rules again so I don't, because I panic under pressure.
It's like Fight Club. You just, there's no rules about Fight Club. You don't talk about lightning round after this. You can't talk about it.
Okay.
These answers are your own. If you want, you can explain your answers. If you don't want to explain your answers, you can just roll through the questions. And it's all in fun and games here.
Okay.
All right. So I think you know the first question. It's always the same. Lennon or McCartney?
Oh, I mean, that's so tough. I go back and forth about once a year. I'm usually a Lennon man for a year and then a McCartney man for a year. McCartney was a big influence on me because I used to like make my own records where I played all the instruments and I recorded everything myself. And I wanted to be McCartney in that way. I think like Lennon always has like a straight shot to the heart, kind of vibe to his work. Like there's something really visceral and guttural about it. And he almost invented punk rock, with the first Plastic Ono Band record. So I got to say, I go back and forth. I'm like a sine wave on those two.
All right, cool. Grapes or strawberries?
Oh, grapes.
Okay. Now here's an interesting one. Would you rather go back in time to visit your ancestors, or would you rather go into the future to meet distant and future relatives or great-great-grandchildren?
I think going into the past, because I'm a little obsessed with my own journey as a person, and I would like to know more about where I came from, and other people's journey that comes after me, I feel like is their own, and I wouldn't want to influence it too much.
All right, cool. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or G.I. Joe?
Oh man, I had both when I was a kid. I guess G.I. Joe. I was a little more into G.I. Joe when I was little.
Okay. Clean boost or an overdrive pedal on your board, and that's all you can have.
Oh, clean boost.
Okay, cool. Gibson or PRS?
I don't actually have anything by either of those companies. I have a couple Epiphones that I really like. I would tend to say Gibson because the PRS has almost seemed too perfect to me.
I'm so close to getting Paul on this show. I have some 1 degrees of separation, and I don't know if you noticed, I'm from Maryland. I live in Baltimore, so like.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, PRS is Yeah, man. Yeah, you know all about that. I mean, you were right up the road from me growing up. How old are you?
I'm 41.
Me too, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we grew up not far from each other.
To do gigs and stuff when I was a kid, and as a roadie, we would drive down to Baltimore all the time. I like it down there. Yeah. Baltimore is one of the only places in the world that people from Philly agree is a tough town. In Philly, we think we're tougher than basically everybody except maybe Baltimore. You know what I mean? Like Baltimore, we're kind of like, you guys are cool.
All right. 112 cabinet or 212 cabinet?
112.
All right. Forrest Gump or Castaway?
Haven't seen either.
Really?
Yeah, I don't watch the movies. I get in trouble with my family and friends a lot. I'm the only. I watch like 10 movies over and over again because I watch movies to shut my brain off, and I don't like watching new movies.
What's your favorite movie?
Probably Dr. Strangelove is my favorite movie, or maybe Big Lebowski. And I just obsessively rewatch those two, and like Star Wars and really easy to digest things that I saw as a kid, and I just rewatch.
So you haven't dove into like any of that new Mandalorian stuff on Disney Plus?
No, I'm thinking about it. Maybe if I get a break on the holidays. I've been, like this. My studio is downstairs from my house, and so I work from home during the day for Havana, and then I work in here at night. Also in the same room. So I spend like 18 hours a day in this room, building stuff for somebody or another, and I haven't had time to watch any television other than like watching guitar shows on YouTube while I'm soldering pedals together.
Okay. Right on. All right, here we go. Would you rather live one life that lasts 1,000 years or 10 lives that last 100 years?
Oh, the first, definitely. Yeah, okay. because you really get a chance to dial it in.
Okay, cool. And then the last one, sometimes it's the hardest, sometimes it's the easiest. WAMP or Euna?
Ooh, I think that's really hard. They're designed to kind of be like the bookends to the pedal board. I will say that before I'd finished the WAMP design, I used 2 Eunas on the board. And like I used Euna as an output driver because I hadn't designed the output driver yet, because it has great output drive characteristics. So if you could only have one, it would probably be better to have Euna. But I haven't really tried WAMP direct in place of Euna because I have other gain pedals that I like. So I guess Euna. It's also my first child.
There you go. Dun, dun, dun. Well, you made it through unscathed. Welcome to the other side of the lightning round get down.
Yeah, cool.
Jesse, thanks so much for hanging out, man. It's so good to talk to you. It's great to meet you.
Mark, thanks for having me on the show. It's really fun to sit and chat with you about it. If you run out of more interesting guests, you can always have me back, and I'll keep talking.
Okay. Well, I mean, I feel like I could talk to you
today.
What's that?
This is the best cheesesteak place in Philadelphia, in case anybody wants to know.
There you go. Yeah, don't go to Pat's or Gino's. Like, there's real stuff there.
Yeah, so. Pat's. The thing I would say about Pat's and Gino's is those are the places we tell people to go so that tourists don't start going to our regular cheesesteak.
See,
nobody in Philly. The only people in Philly who go there are people who like live in that neighborhood. Nobody would drive to Pat's or Gino's. People who live in the neighborhood will go there because it's pretty good, but it's not the best.
No.
and
Yeah.
rock.
Yeah. Right on. Well, man, I super appreciate you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I can't wait to see, what you got cooking later on. And ladies and gentlemen, this Saturday, so already this week is awesome, but this Saturday, Jono Ricks from the Wood Brothers is going to be on.
Oh, cool. Oh, watch out. That's going to be great.
Man, Jono's like, have you ever seen the Wood Brothers live at all?
Mm-mm.
Dude, have you listened to those guys at all?
I don't think so. I know I've seen little clips here and there, and it seems like cool stuff.
Man, they are. So I have two favorite bands, and they're such in a juxtaposition: Pearl Jam and the Wood Brothers. And my wife was like, I can't believe you're putting stickers on your car. Like I have a Pearl Jam sticker on one side and a Wood Brothers sticker on the other side.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, he plays drums in that band. He sings his ass off, and he plays keys and drums at the same time.
Oh yeah, I used to do that. I was in that briefly. It's I was really proud of myself when I did it. When I used to still play in bands here in LA, there was a wonderful songwriter called Charlie Hilton. I was in her band, and it was a trio with me, her, and a bass player, and I played drums. And there was a moment where like the bass player left, and we didn't have a bass player. We were going to get another bass player. I'm like, I don't know. And basically, I just put a pianette over the floor tom and played bass with my right hand and played.
Nice.
Oh man. Like if you ever want to feel cool, do that. Like play like that. It's really cool. Although when it goes wrong, it's awful because like you're in a band and the drummer makes a mistake, whatever. Bass player makes a mistake, whatever. But if the drummer and the bass player make a mistake at the same time, that's a really weird feeling for the people in the band. And so if you're the bass player and the drummer, it's really nerve wracking because you're like I can't make a single mistake.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't have to worry about that. He has Chris Wood playing bass. So it's like, you know what I mean?
So that's from MMW, right?
And Oliver Wood is his brother. They're the two brothers, the Wood brothers in the band. I
used to go see MMW sometimes in Philly. They were amazing to see live back in the 90s. It was great.
Yeah, man. All that stuff. And then as soon as Sco put out, a go-go with those guys on it, I was just like,
yeah.
All right, that's it for me. I guess I like Boogaloo and like, funky jazz stuff. So that was the end of it for me. But so anyway, guys, we'll see you Saturday. Jesse, again, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, man.
Check out all his stuff. Make sure you go follow him on all the socials. Check out the Euna. My demo of the Euna should be popping this Sunday night or Monday at the latest.
Yeah.
So that'll be up on my channel, so you guys can check that out. But
and if you're looking for one, I did something kind of like counterintuitive for the holidays. There was a fixed amount that I could make for the rest of the year because the metalwork and stuff takes time. And so I stopped taking pre-orders in my personal store, my direct sales store, because a lot of dealers have been really kind enough to buy some for the holidays and to take some stock, which is hard for dealers to do this year because of the pandemic and everything like that. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that if people are looking for one, they kind of reach out to these dealers and get one through them because, when I was a kid, I mean, you probably had a similar experience because we grew up when we did, every weekend, every time I had 5 minutes to myself, I would go to a music store and I would go to that's how I learned about everything is like going to Westchester Music, and going to 8th Street Music downtown in Philly and looking in the pedal case when I was broke. And that's how I learned about everything. And so I really want to make sure that in this kind of challenging year that I try to give some love back to those people. So if you're looking for one, you can hit me up and I'll try to connect you with a dealer. And then maybe January, maybe last week of December, we'll turn pre-orders back on the site. Cool. Yeah, definitely support local businesses during the holidays this year, Hanukkah, Christmas, all that stuff. Just make sure you guys are taking care of your local retailers. That's important right now, especially. So yeah, they're great. And it's I don't know the experience of teenagers these days, but when I was a teenager, those were the places I wanted to go. Me too, man. Me too. All right, folks. Well, we'll see you next time. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, we'll see you guys. Talk to you soon.